Good afternoon. The Information Technology and Government Affairs Committee will now come to order. We'll be taking up the items in order as they appear on the agenda. We'll begin with item number 1.
And item number 1 is a motion, Cardenas-Labange Huizar, relative to the status of lease agreements for the installation of telecommunications equipment on City of Los Angeles property, including potential revenue from such agreements and related matters.
Reggie Jones Sawyer, General Services Asset Management Division. As you've read in some of the reports, there's already been a telecommunications motion done quite a while ago. I can just briefly tell you, General Services has attempted to try to put out an RFP to solicit some kind of working relationship with the telecommunications community to come in and work on our sites. We yielded no responses from that since I guess about 2003. Since then, we've been approached by T-Mobile with an opportunity to move forward with actually expanding that on all our city buildings. And so we're looking at all the different viable places and what kind of revenue we can generate. And I think before you, the questions that are being asked are very relevant, because we need to have that information before we ultimately move forward with an expanded plan. So they want to do a master lease.
When it comes to that kind of activity, does it look as though the response that you've received, it appears that they want an exclusivity per site, or they just want access to a site and have a relationship with the city and that particular site?
We don't know, because we never got any responses from anyone when we made calls.
For? You just
Well, now.
Yeah, exactly.
I'm talking about 7 years ago, 6 years ago.
So where are you in the process of dialoguing with the interested party?
We've had multiple conversations with them. In fact, we even looked at a possible master lease agreement and what it would look like that we'll have the city attorney look at. And we've also given them our access to our real estate portfolio so they could actually pinpoint some specific areas where they could put some telecommunication sites. And so we're well down the road on possibly crafting something that could be financially beneficial to the city.
Okay. How would this process differ from what is referred to as a joint pole authority?
Joint fold?
Pole.
Pole.
P-O-L-E.
Actually, this is what they're proposing, a joint pole proposal.
Yes.
The attorney?
Good afternoon, Ted Jordan, Assistant City Attorney. The joint pole agreement is an agreement that the city entered into many, many decades ago that is administered by the Department of Water and Power that relates to installations that are on the utility poles that are in the right-of-way. Mm-hmm. So it's strictly an instrument to allow the shared use of utility poles. One of the benefits being that if people share poles, then you have fewer poles that are installed. But it doesn't really relate to this motion at all, which will relate to installations on the, say, rooftops of city buildings and other locations.
Mm-hmm. Does that particular authority actually preclude or mention anything about exclusivity to that particular site for a particular use or particular agreement?
I don't advise the Department of Water and Power directly, so I'm not that familiar with it. But again, the joint pole agreement relates to the utility poles and the shared use of the poles. So it wouldn't really have any bearing on any kind of exclusivity or non-exclusivity of installations on, say, the rooftop of a city building.
Okay. Any questions?
On the, Reggie, on the outs of the RFP notification, how wide was that spread to get some response, which you didn't receive any?
We contacted every entity that we knew of that had this type of capability.
So you sent out requests and they didn't
respond.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. We have public comment cards. John Q. Public Affairs, John Q. Lee, and then Clark Harris.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. Thank you for taking this item up. this afternoon for your consideration, and I'm going to forward my time to Mr. Clark Harris, who represents T-Mobile USA, to make a presentation.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. My name is Clark Harris. I work with T-Mobile USA, and I reside in our offices in Simi Valley, California. I am an employee and responsible for real estate development in the cell site portion of Los Angeles. So I figured I'd start off with answering a couple of the questions that you just asked point blank and what we're looking for. The first one is you asked about exclusivity, and no, we are not asking for exclusivity. Precisely just the opposite. All we're looking for is the opportunity to lease real estate that is city-owned. What happens a lot of times in our industry, which is also in the state and your city ordinance, it drives future wireless carriers to want to co-locate. As an overall visual, we try and condense our use as much as possible and share an existing pole. So for example, if I'm on a park and I put a fake pine tree in, it drives and allows the opportunity for another carrier to come in, and we welcome that. That's additional revenue to the city. We will not be taking that revenue. They lease space from you. So again, we are not asking for exclusivity. The second the kind of main discussion came up was the right-of-way JPA, Joint Pole Authority. As we, point blank understand, the right-of-way joint pole is a controversial topic. We are trying to look for alternatives to get out of the right-of-way, and this is one that we believe is a good option. The reason we believe is a good option is because going to city-owned property takes us out of the right-of-way and allows for a full conditional use permit. So it is bringing it into the light of the discretionary permit process. So we go before a ZA and there is full notification and full public input. Also, in this particular process,
Continue, go ahead.
thank you. In this particular process, each council member in their particular district has the ability to veto the lease. As this is a lease, this is a real estate business transaction, the council member can, if and they're so choosing, veto the lease, and then I would not be able to, or myself or any other carrier for that matter, lease space from that particular city property. Basically, the idea we're asking for you today is a master lease agreement. We're looking at a master lease agreement because it's one lease that creates a template, and it's efficient, and be easy to apply across all city properties. And then as you subject to each particular property, you would enter into a site lease agreement, and the specifics of physically what are you going to lease at that particular property, the date it starts, the rent rate, etc., is just detailed in that one specific agreement, but the overall legal and business terms will be covered in the master agreement. And it's a very efficient use of both sides of our time, and opens up the door for something that we could use over time. I wanted to get into this because you also asked about the RFP process and why that may have failed in the past. Is being in private business, we have set annual budgets, as the city does as well, and we don't always know what our future budgets are. So by allowing us over time to be able to identify where our needs, and as our budget allows us on an annual basis, and having a master agreement, we would be able to continue to ask for the opportunity on a particular property. This is an over time, long-term revenue generation, and we won't come to you all in 1 year and offer 100 particular projects all at once.
John?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. I just wanted to add a couple of things to make clear, and we've also had some supporting documents because we didn't want to take up the committee's entire time for today. We have other items I'm sure you want to cover, but this council motion is basically the first step in exploring the notion of renting the city-owned property, and I just want to make clear on behalf of T-Mobile on the record is that we don't view this as a way of circumventing any kind of public review or approval process. We know at the end of the day we could, we can explore a site that we might not be turned out to be viable because they have to apply for a plan approval or a conditional use permit through the ZA review and approval process. So we're not trying to circumvent any process, and we're all about involving the council and the community in the process. In fact, the ordinance makes mention about the residential council member veto during the lease negotiations. I just wanted to highlight that point, and also to thank you again for taking this item up, and we view this as a real win-win for the industry as well as for the city and the council and the community. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Could I have GSD up here again? Should there be one or many sites that we could have such an agreement with a third party, is there a limit as to, or is there a limit, or is the money likely to be benefit the general fund?
Ultimately, the money will benefit the general fund.
Okay, so there's
As
no,
to the
there's
numbers,
not a restriction saying that the money has to go to X. Obviously, that's a policy decision of the council in the future, but all I'm saying is, as far as you can tell, should we create an agreement tomorrow, not that we could do something overnight around here, tomorrow, as it stands right now, absent another policy decision, it would likely be a general fund matter,
yes,
correct?
correct.
So what we're exploring here, or this discussion, is actually something that could in fact benefit the general fund,
Yes,
as
it
it
will.
stands today.
As it stands today, it will.
How much are we potentially looking for in revenue?
And that's part of
No idea.
the negotiations. We've done some other, we have very few, maybe half a dozen cell sites that have very old agreements, and they've been as little as $1,500 a month,
A site?
a site, per site. And so I don't know what the market would bear right now. It may be the same, it may be a little more.
So technically, to add to Councilmember Zion's question, if we're looking at potentially hundreds of sites, when you look at, we have libraries, we have parks, we have buildings that we own, et cetera, when you're looking at that, there's potentially hundreds of sites that could have such an agreement on it, one or more agreements per site. So even at that figure of $1,500 on an old agreement, we could potentially be looking at revenue to the city in excess of millions and millions of dollars a year, correct?
And if you're looking at that, yes.
Obviously, if it were to flourish across hundreds of sites around the city.
Yes.
Okay. All right.
That's good.
So we're not talking hundreds of thousands. We're definitely talking potentially in the millions,
Correct.
upwards.
Okay.
Thank you. That concludes the two public comment cards I have for item number one. Is there anybody else here for public comment on item number one? Seeing and hearing no more people coming forward for public comment on item number one. Public comment on item number one is now closed. With that, it's the committee instruction to GSD and CAO to report back in 30 days the matters that this motion covers, and also what was discussed today as far as the potential for at least one interested party that has come forward regarding these such potential agreements. In addition to that, have the CAO report back on whether or not there is potential for fiscal impact of placement of such communication equipment on city facilities. Again, as it was mentioned a few minutes ago, the extrapolation right now is a bit broad. We need to start narrowing it down a little bit more as to what the true potential is so we can understand the magnitude of the opportunity here. Okay? Right. Thank you. We now move to item number two.
Item number two is a report from the Chief Legislative Analyst relative to the city's position on the State Parks and Wildlife Conservation Trust Fund Act of 2010 pursuant to Resolution Koretz-Perry.
Good afternoon, Cheryl Benarsh from the CLA. The resolution before you today recommends support of the State Parks and Wildlife Conservation Trust Fund Act of 2010, a statewide initiative slated for the November 2010 ballot. If passed, the act would go into effect January 1st, 2011, and would provide a stable and adequate source of funding to protect state parks and wildlife. The act requires an $18 annual state park access pass surcharge on all California cars, motorcycles, and recreational vehicles that would be part of the vehicle license fee. The funds collected would be used for the operation, maintenance, management, planning, and development of the state park system. Those subject to the surcharge would receive free admission to the entire state park system. The initiative also provides an annual independent audit by the state auditor and the establishment of a citizens oversight committee to ensure that funds are being used appropriately. Supporters of this initiative state that it will provide sufficient funds to preserve and rehabilitate parks throughout the state. The initiative is supported by several organizations, state assembly members, and senators. There is currently no opposition on file. Our office recommends support.
Now, this $18 fee would be a voluntary fee or a mandatory fee on every vehicle licensed in the state of California?
Per the conservation who's spearheading the efforts, it would be a mandatory fee.
Okay. So if somebody has a 1980 Dodge that they're barely keeping together and their fees right now are maybe $56 all told, this would be $18 on top of that?
I believe that's how the fee works. I talked to the organization and they said that it would just be mandatory in all cars. And they said the reason is because if it were a voluntary fee, it wouldn't be sufficient enough to cover the cost of keeping the state parks open, or the amount of money that they would need to keep them open.
Okay, so also that means that if somebody has a $300,000 vehicle that they register in the state of California and say their fees are $3,500 a year, it would be $18 on top of their normal fees.
I believe so. And I can get clarification from the organization that's spearheading it, but I think it's just an $18 flat fee that every vehicle would pay. There's a few exempt vehicles like commercial, trucks and mobile homes that wouldn't be counted towards the fee, but any, I think, personal vehicle would count.
Okay. Any questions?
Is there a cost of living in that $18, or is it $18 until it changes to a higher level?
It doesn't say anything in the ballot initiative, but I could, again, bring that back to the organization and ask them.
And you say this is cars, motorcycles?
And recreational vehicles. So the few exempt vehicles are larger commercial vehicles, mobile homes, and permanent trailers. Right now.
And permanent trailers, they'd be exempt?
They'd be exempt, correct.
So that would bring in about $54 million a year? Do they have an estimated total?
Their total estimate, they think it could approximately bring in $500 million in annual revenues.
$500 million?
Yeah, and they base that on 28 million vehicles being subject to the surcharge.
And the registration went up this last year with the governor and the legislature going back on what was removed?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Does this speak to the daily access charge that people pay when they access the parks?
The only people that would be, I think, subject to the daily access fee, if the surcharge is put into place, all California vehicles would be free and anyone subject to the surcharge, but I think everyone coming from out of state would still have to pay the daily day use fees.
And then also if somebody wanted to camp overnight, that's a different fee.
Yeah, and camping
would still
fees,
remain?
yeah, camping fees would still remain, and there's certain other fees that still remain, but camping fees won't be part of the surcharge.
And the annual budget of the department right now, just to run the administrative responsibilities?
I don't know off the top of my head, but per the organization that's spearheading the effort, right now, state parks only get 4% of the state budget, and I think it's even less. It's proposed to be even less in next year's budget.
Okay. We do have a public comment card on item number 2. Eric Norton.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, committee members. Eric Norton from Councilmember Paul Corrett's office, just here to read a brief statement of support into the record. What makes California, California? What gives Californians our roots and a sense of place living in this wonderful land? As much as anything, it's our remarkable natural resources and wildlife, which we are able to enjoy and celebrate in large part because we have state parks. But that's true only as long as we have the resources to protect and to preserve those state parks and the facilities there that make them safe and enjoyable for people to visit. Unfortunately, the economic downward spiral and related state budget cuts have had a harshly damaging impact on our parks, causing them to accumulate $1 billion in needed maintenance and repairs. Park lovers and environmentalists, including the Save the Redwoods League, Sierra Club California, and the California State Parks Foundation, have joined together to propose the creation of the State Parks and Wildlife Conservation Trust Fund Act of 2010, which will use an $18 annual state park access pass surcharge on some California vehicles to help protect, maintain, repair, and keep open our precious state parks. Since such a surcharge would require passage of a proposed state initiative, Councilmember Kretz and this resolution call for strong support by the Mayor and City Council of the State Parks and Wildlife Conservation Trust Fund Act of 2010 and related initiative to become part of the city's 2009-2010 state legislative program. Thank you.
Okay. It appears that the main public supporters of this measure are the Nature Conservancy, Sierra Club of California, Audubon of California, and the California State Parks Foundation. Is there anybody here that is directly associated with these organizations that would like to speak on this? Personally, I don't see how this is a bad thing. It's a good thing. However, I'm not sure what the status of the state parks are today as far as do they see their charge as to keep the space open and pristine, and or do they see their charge as far as educating California families and or California children and giving them access and program opportunities for them to experience these parks? I'm not sure what they consider their core responsibilities to be. Any other questions?
I just have some concerns about the $18 charge on the folks that have vehicles. There was a reduction in the vehicle license fee. That was removed. Many of the vehicle license fees have doubled, which is causing a lot of distress to a lot of people. I know they're releasing 20,000 people out of state prisons, so the next thing could come in as another $18 charge on vehicle license to take care of the prisons, and another $18 charge for something else. I have no problem with the parks. I think the parks are great. I have a concern about the $18 tacked onto the registration fee. If it was optional, I would be supportive, and some places have an option. But I think if you look at this particular measure, with the vehicle license fee going back to what it was, in many cases doubling, I think this creates a lot of problems for the people in California who are struggling to make ends meet. Well, it's only $18 if you got two cars, and many families have two cars, and they may have two cars and a motorcycle, and I think this opens the door to just assessing more charges on people. I mean, I'm not going to support it because I think that the cost is going to hurt the general driving public. Whether they go to parks or not, they're going to be paying for that. But I can see the next thing coming in for the prison population. So let's do this to keep the prisoners instead of letting them out. And if they get out, you can't go to the park anyway because it won't be safe. So I can't support it on those grounds that the cost, I think, is going to open the floodgates of additional fees. But if it was voluntary, I would be supportive if people could opt into it. But I don't like this mandatory part. And I don't know if it's going to be $20 the year after and then $30 the year after. And many times that's what happens with these fees. It's just there's an escalation clause. And I haven't read it in detail, but I would be concerned about an escalation clause where it could increase year after year.
And Councilmember Zine, John Wickham just informed me that there wouldn't be any escalation costs with it.
So it maxes out at $18?
It would.
They don't have a COLA or an escalator.
Well, when you look about the 4% available for appropriation from the fund to the Ocean Protection Council for Marine Wildlife, then you talk about 2% available to proportion for the fund to state conservation for management operation wildlife, 2% to fund the Wildlife Conservation Board for grants to local agencies for wildlife conservation. I mean, if you look at how they're going to take the $18 and 85% available for funds to be for Department of Recs and Parks, and then 7% available fund the Department of Fish and Game for management operations of wildlife refuge. it's not just the parks. There's a lot attached to this. And if it was just the parks, maybe it wouldn't have to be $18. Anyway, I'm not going to, again, I want to say I support the parks, but I don't support this fee, unless it was voluntary.
Okay. We'll do a roll. Let me go over the public comment. We already had Eric come up. Anybody else here to speak on item number 2, public comment? Item number 2, public comment is open. See no one come forth or submit a card. Public comment on item 2 is now closed. With that, we'll do a roll call vote to approve the CLA report. All those in favor? All those opposed?
No.
Opposed. That's 1 in favor and 2 opposed. So it'll go forth to the next committee or council with that vote. Okay.
Very good.
We now move to items 3 and 7. We'll hold those items together. Thank you.
And item 3 is a motion, Cardenas signed, relative to instructing the CAO and CLA in concurrence with the ITA to convene a working group to review the current proposed technology request process, proposals to consolidate the help desk and the desktop support program, other consolidation initiatives, identifying potential risks and benefits of consolidation, and the potential for public-private partnerships. And at the same time, item number 7 is a motion, Cardenas-Koretz, relative to directing the CAO to study with appropriate stakeholders a restructuring proposal for IT restructuring and infrastructure efficiencies.
Okay. The idea of consolidation of IT responsibilities is not new to this city. I don't think it's new to any government entity. And I think, in my opinion, it appears to be a lot more common that consolidation is done in the private sector more than the public sector. So with that, to the department, is there anything you'd like to share with us as far as the potential for consolidation and perhaps some examples of what has kept us from consolidating these responsibilities within a main department?
Yeah, the Randy Levin, Chief Technology Officer and General Manager at the City of LA. IT consolidation is becoming more prevalent in the public sector now. I was just trying to gather some recent Gartner Group statistics on this, and I didn't get the local government ones, but the state government one was that at least 1/3 of U.S. state government agencies have completed or have launched some form of IT consolidation activity. And this thing goes on basically to say that, in the past it was for efficiency and cost savings, and now it's gone beyond that to, in some cases, just survival because of the downturn in the economy and the effects on most of the IT organizations. And certainly in our case, that is the case. With losing so many staff based on all of the various ways people are leaving or transferring out, we're left with critical skill set gaps. We're also left with a lot less staff to be able to do the services and functions that we perform. And unlike other entities, we just can't turn off equipment and we just can't turn off systems. So, our staffing is getting reduced, but yet we still have to continue the service at the way it's pretty much running today. So it's put additional burden on not just our IT organization, but the IT organizations of the departments as well, where they're losing staff. And one way to make up for some of this is to start a consolidation effort and look at the opportunities to consolidate. And these are generally a multi-year initiative. Things aren't just done, by pressing a button and everything comes together. And there are ways to do this in a process-oriented manner. One of the interesting quotes that it says in this Gartner article, this is from last week, so it's timely. It says, the biggest hurdles relates to politics and turf, the unwillingness of agencies to cede control of part of their current organization to an outside agency, and political leadership must hold all agency heads jointly accountable for success. And it goes on from there. But I firmly believe that, we really need this motion, and we need support from the council in order to make this, an effective initiative for the city, as well as it's almost a survival tactic for us right now.
Okay. as it stands right now, in order to do this consolidation, if we were to direct your department to spearhead this and to make it happen, what authority do you realistically have to do so when it comes to other departments and other department heads?
I'm not the charter expert, but I do believe what I've been told is that our agency does have the authority to manage IT in the city. Now, that could be up for interpretation. That's what I've been told.
Yeah, but just because you have the authority to manage IT matters within the city doesn't mean that that precludes other departments for trying to justify that they should handle their own IT responsibilities.
That's correct.
That's what I mean by you don't have authority to tell them what not to do. You just have authority over what you're mandated to do, correct?
Correct.
So the reason why I asked you that question is because I think that's always at the core of why consolidation really doesn't come about, especially when it comes to government organizations such as a city like ours. In addition to that, so that we understand how serious the matter is, approximately how much money to the nearest few $100 million is the city of Los Angeles laying out on an annual basis for all of the responsibilities relative to hardware, software, maintenance, support in all of its respects in a city like ours with 4 million constituents, 40,000 employees, $4 billion general fund budget plus.
Well, we're close to $500 million in spend.
So we're guesstimating, and I say guesstimate because I think that with all of this spread out in different pockets and different departments handling things in possible duplication, $500 million is probably a pretty safe round figure, but we really don't know exactly how much.
That's correct.
Okay. Now, as we consolidate further and further, do we expect two things will happen? One, we'll have a better handle on how much we are in fact spending on a month-to-month and annual basis. And secondly, do you think that we will identify duplication in the process and eliminate duplication in some cases?
The answer is yes to both of those questions.
What makes you confident that those two things will happen? Has that ever happened before on this earth? Has it ever happened under your responsibility anywhere else?
Yes, it has happened on this earth. And yes, it's...
Give us an example.
There are numerous examples that we can pull all the data from of public companies, of different governments that have consolidated. There's one right here in this Gartner article that says that the government of Australia in the state of Queensland consolidated all of their IT and saved, I don't know, $15 million out of $75 million. So there's examples all over the place. We can pull those.
Okay. According to CAO recommendations, we could be saving an estimated $20 million over a 3-year period if we centralize and do appropriate contracting, et cetera, when it comes to IT. Again, I consider that to be a ballpark figure. It could be off a little bit, could be a little low, could be a little high. I think the potential of savings is actually higher. Is there anybody here from the CLA or the CAO that would like to speak to this matter and give your estimates as to what we're potentially looking at if we consolidate appropriately and realistically?
Yeah, this is Jacob Wexler from the Office of the City Administrative Officer. We don't have a sense of how much could be saved from looking at consolidating. For one thing, there's so many different approaches and so many different areas and functions that could be consolidated. Until we know exactly what's going to happen, it'd be hard to make those estimates. In addition, we're in the process of doing fact-finding, looking at what departments have, looking at that number that was identified as to what we're spending. Until we kind of do a thorough analysis, go back to departments, and really get a sense of what we can and can't do, it's going to be hard to come up with an actual number. The number that we referenced in that report was based on information that ITA have pulled
Yes,
together.
I'm sorry, I misspoke. It was ITA that was being quoted.
But we looked, at their numbers initially and got a sense of where they came from. I think the key issue is going to be identifying the actual employees that are working on those functions in other departments. And clearly there are places where we could do there, I guess you'd call it low-hanging fruit, areas of where consolidation could be carried out, or contracting could be carried out, that would increase efficiency, hopefully without impacting services citywide and without impacting initially department's core IT functions, just things that nobody focuses on other than IPA. So we would like to, we're initiating a process to look into that in more detail, and hopefully we'll periodically be able to come back with you with estimates and actually put some things in the budget with some savings in them.
Now, again, this is nothing that's new. I mean, it appears that we've talked about this from a policy vantage point at least 5 or 6 times over the last 20 years. And it's something that when you came on board, it was something that you discussed directly with the mayor and his office, with various council offices, with this committee, that what we wanted from this department, from your department, is to make sure that we did move forward and continually march forward with consolidation, that we would be identifying areas of duplication and eliminating that duplication, that we would do consolidation not only of bodies but equipment, and also pull in the responsibilities away from departments and having a specialty team like yours to be spearheading both the purchasing, the maintenance, the contracting of services when it comes around information technology. Has that been coming along quickly, or has it been rather slow?
No, that's been rather slow.
Let me ask you some questions. Relative to the police department, do they have their own infrastructure of IT support?
Yes, they do.
They do? How about the fire
They're here
department?
today, too, if you want to ask them directly, too.
Yeah.
Sandy Jo MacArthur, the Los Angeles Police Department. It's a very bad cold. I'm actually here in support of this proposal because with everything that we are looking at facing the city, we needed to look at consolidation, efficiencies, effectiveness, and saving money. All the departments, the large departments, including ours, is getting hit hard with the ERIP. Yes, and as you know, in the past, the department has had some concerns about certain things in the IT world, but Randy and my shop have been working very closely, and we feel that this is a very good opportunity in this difficult time to hopefully come together on some of these issues that have basically created the roadblocks in the past, and working together and looking for these. And Randy's well aware of the concerns that we have regarding some of the things in IT that we would feel we need to keep, but we do think there's many opportunities for consolidation in some of the other areas. So we're here in support.
And one of the things that a lot of taxpayers don't realize, just the one issue of space, having to have a building, for example, the new building across the street, it's my understanding that there was a lot of going back and forth about how much space in the new police building would be dedicated to the actual computer and or electronics and technology that they would have to support the police department, and specifically that building. That space is, every square foot costs money, either to build and for to lease and for to maintain, et cetera, or simply to keep it cool, right?
Yeah, that's correct.
There's a lot of issues that the public just doesn't realize that go into the maintaining of facilities just simply for the space, adequate space, and the conditions necessary to keep that equipment safe.
Yes, that's correct. So, we support this. We think it's a great opportunity to work together.
Okay. Well, I'm glad to hear that. And again, I respect and appreciate the fact that you're being honest with us and saying that there are opportunities for consolidation and for IT to handle things that perhaps the police department handles today, but not everything.
That's correct.
Right. And if there's a department that has that concern and it's valid, it's a department like yours that has, for example, sensitive data that by law in some cases are not allowed to be touched or handled by anybody other than someone of a certain credential. So
yes, and we've actually, Randy and I and Maggie Girdrich have had some discussions about what could be consolidated and what probably needs to be kept, but we feel that this proposal and we would like to be part of the group that gets together so that we could make some recommendations, hopefully for cost savings and efficiencies.
thank you. You're going to head out. You're going to question.
Regarding sworn versus civilian, I know the police department's had the struggles with Teams 2, in-car video, with the IT aspect. Sworn versus civilian oversight on the computer operation with the LAPD, is it mostly civilian oversight?
It is mostly civilian. We do have some sworn, but that's mostly for the, excuse me, for the testing aspect of it. And then, of course, the civilian leadership are work under me. So we do have the sworn oversight at my level as well. So we've really turned most of the oversight of the actual IT over to civilian personnel.
Now, what about background checks as far as internal security for the aspect IT personnel versus personnel within the police department with confidential records, et cetera?
The confidential records, and those are some of the things that Randy and I have been talking about. The confidential records, we have to ensure that only people who have gone through the background checks can do that. And that's why it would really be important for us to be part of this group, to study the process, so that we are very clear on what can be consolidated and what needs to be kept separate.
But those folks could oftentimes be civilians that have gone through a background check
Absolutely.
that manage that.
Absolutely.
Would they have that same within IT?
Yes, yes. If we were going to work on certain police systems that had confidential data, we'd put them through the same process, same background check process.
So while they're employed by the city of Los Angeles in a specific category, those that work in the confidential sensitive areas go through an additional background check to make sure that, okay.
Yes.
All right, thank you. Go ahead, that's all.
I want to give some other departments who are present an opportunity to comment on these items. Sanitation, somebody here from sanitation relative to IT?
Good afternoon, council members. Baruch Atkin, Assistant Director with Bureau of Sanitation. Enrique Zaldivar could not be here. I'm representing our bureau. We're the largest, third largest department in the city with 2,000 users. We totally support formation of an executive group and would like to be part of it, having the size, the number of users that we have. I just wanted to mention that one of the things, as it's been mentioned in the motion, council motion, that there is a state of disarray on the IT areas. And I think a part of that has to do with lack of a strategic plan to know what the priorities are and where to align the resources with the right priorities. Because as dollars are scarce, people are scarce, our resources, and what we need to do first needs to be targeting towards reducing cities' liabilities. Cannot do everything. Furthermore, wanted to mention that the Bureau of Sanitation has 724 operation responsibilities in various areas of solid resources, watershed management, and also wastewater conveyance and treatment. Some of our control systems that are managed by certain IT systems, they are very similar to the ATSAC system, which controls the traffic signals in the streets, and it's been excluded for consolidation. So I like to definitely, I commend you of coming up with this motion of creating an executive group and allowing us the opportunity to be part of that group to make sure that our voices are heard and the city as a family will move towards a better future. Thank you.
Thank you. Fire Department?
Good afternoon. Dennis Blumhoff,
Yeah.
Director of Systems for the Fire Department. We support the study to look at IT consolidation in the city. I think it's important for us to work together with the CLA, CAO, and ITA to present solutions to some of the problems we're all facing today.
Okay. And does your department have specialty information that's sensitive beyond what is considered sensitive within generic purposes?
We do, but it falls under the emergency medical services area and HIPAA compliance in those areas. And we are working on that with a new system, which we'll be presenting soon to the council.
But outside of those particulars, there are potentially opportunities to consolidate some
Yes.
of the responsibilities within your department?
There are. We've had these conversations with ITA and also internally.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
General Services?
Tony Orchestra, General Manager of the Department of General Services. We're more than willing to sit down with ITA and look at all our different systems and see what's potential good for consolidation and what special systems that we have that might not be. So we're very happy to work with this committee to do that.
Are there any particular systems that you're responsible for that are perhaps large or very involved with our day-to-day operations as a city?
There might be some issues with our Office of Public Safety which might involve security issues, but we'll be willing to sit down and look at the options there.
But how big are some of the systems that you're responsible for today?
I think you have the SMS, which is a very large system. We have the building management system. We have, I think, some systems in asset management. A lot of specialty systems we need to look at and see, what works best for the consolidation and exactly, what service levels that we need to make sure that the services are at the level we need to perform the job.
Well, one of the things that I think the public might be confused about when they think about consolidation, they think that we can go ahead and say, well, let's put everything just on one computer or one mainframe. That's impossible. We have dedicated systems, we have dedicated responsibilities, we have specific responsibilities. However, there are opportunities for us to consolidate and to pull together and reduce the amount of resources that we're utilizing today if we identify them properly. So I just want to make it very clear that I don't think anybody's dreaming about a day where we only have one system. I think it's impossible looking at the array of responsibilities that we have. We have payroll responsibilities. We have responsibilities within the police department. There are many, many responsibilities, just like you said, the management system of our finances, which is totally different than many other systems that we have. Any other comments from General Services?
Well, I think you bring up a good point. In General Services, we actually manage 43 different applications based on the diversity of our department. Some of them may overlap with what other departments are doing. Obviously, the biggest one that we do manage is the supplier management system. But, for example, we have a vehicle management system that is shared with ITA, Fire Department, Police Department. That may be a good opportunity, something that we can explore. There's others that are more individual and unique to the department that may or may not lend themselves to consolidation. But then again, without exploring it, we really don't know. So.
Thank you. Correct. Thank you. Thank you very much. City Clerk?
Good afternoon. Greg Allison, Director Assistant City Clerk. We're in support of the proposed study and would welcome being an active participant on that study and look at the recommendations. As far as our unique operations go, we do have the elections, municipal elections, business improvement district elections, neighborhood council elections, as well as a number of union and agency elections, which is somewhat of a unique function and a very fast-paced, critical environment. So we'd want to explore that and ensure that whatever proposals move forward, that we're not negatively impacting those operations and that we are getting the same type of priority and quick service and response that we're able to continue our operations.
Okay, thank you. Planning?
Good afternoon, council members. I'm Eva Mcdaniel, Planning Department Deputy Director. The Planning Department is in support of the study to look at possibilities and opportunities for consolidation. And the planning department, in a way, is a little different from the other departments in terms of our systems. We are not a very big department, but our systems are very specialized, and it serves not only the internal city operation, but also they serve the citizens on a 24/7 basis. For example, the planning department is the I think I can call it owner and keeper of the city's official zone map system. We call it ZMAS. The ZMAS system is accessed by not only city departments involved in the permitting process, but also the public and the development community when they need to check the zoning of all close to 1 million properties in the city, and also to look up case processing information and other ownership information, things like that. The planning department also automated case processing, our PCTS system, which is linked to our document management system, in which you can get decision letters over the internet from anywhere in the city or in the world. And we also use IT for our policy development. Just recently, you all voted on the medical marijuana ordinance, and several scenarios were given to the planning department to come up with maps, and that was done by the planning IT staff with our GIS staff. And so IT is tightly weaved into our operations. So we welcome the opportunity to look at things that we can consolidate with ITA, but also we want to make sure that our unique specialty and also our skills are addressed, that doesn't get diluted in a general department.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Any other departments here prepared to comment on this IT consolidation matter? Okay. Thank you. We'll go to public comment cards now. We have 2 public comment cards. This one is on 3 and/or 7. Julie Butcher. And the second one is Dr. Clyde Williams.
Thanks for the opportunity to be heard on this. SEIU now represents professionals in the IT department. We have long advocated for the consolidation of this work. The fact is that you have in the city a centralized IT function that at the end of an early retirement will be down to 614 employees, and you have decentralized IT functions in every city department. I think one of the primary questions you want to ask each department is how many and what are they doing? We believe truly that this opportunity is way more than $20 million and that it's more like a $50 to $100 million opportunity. Obviously, many things are involved. But first of all, somebody needs to get to work on this. It's one of those things that has been talked about for years and years and years. You have literally a centralized agency, decentralized operation, one or the other. But you have both. And that makes both completely ineffective. Now, a central IT agency has to be able to deliver for departments what it is that they need. Regardless of the diversity of applications, the days of mainframes and of a centralized that we're going to have the same thing in every department, obviously what you've heard is many departments have many different opportunities. The workers need to be involved in this process. This needs to be lots and lots of folks yelling at each other and figuring out the best way to do this. Work has been consolidated in this city. It has never been easy. It has always been better at the end of the day. But that means getting to work, not contracting out the work, but getting to work, getting folks together, figuring out what's where, and then making it the best possible technology we can. It needs to drive the work, not the other way around. We want to be part of the solution, eager to help. Again, we now represent the professionals in IT, and so rather than threatening people with being laid off in this kind of random way, we'd like to work with you and with the department to do what we do as best as we can do it.
Thank you.
Dr. Clyde Williams, El Sereno, Northeast LA. You just have too many gorillas in the city's circus. What do you have? You have, not included, Department of Water and Power, ports, airports, and many of the other organizations which could provide some funding because they're in the same boat. They have COBOL systems, they have this system, they have Windows systems, they have so many systems, and each one has a vested group. COBOL. When did we give up that in general? So you have a complex system that has too many legacies, even into the hierarchy, and maybe the early retirements will get rid of some of that and open up the system. Help desks are a problem in every state, federal, and municipal organization because nobody has the power to impose a standard system, whereas in a private company, you do it, and you do it once, and everybody better comply, because if you don't get paid. So in point of fact, you can talk about, you might say, trying to impose it, but where are you going to get the money? If you include Department of Water and Power, which cannot change their billing because it's in COBOL and in mainframe and in legacy systems, add them, add the ports. The airport has the same problems. The seaport has the same problems. DWP have the same problems. And they have some money still left. And I think the savings would be actually far greater than what you're talking about. And if you could get DWP ports and airports to fund it, hey, you got the source of money. Thank you.
Thank you. IT Department, any other comments you'd like to add?
Well, I think we just want to respond to a few of the things that were said by, the various other speakers. Just know, too, we run 24/7 operations that do support police, fire, and all the various other city departments. So it's not like we don't have an understanding of 24/7 operations. And we're going to have to take a critical eye at things like the water treatment plants and the ADSAC and see if there's any opportunity there. And if there's not, there's not. But we have to define some criteria by which, we consolidate or we don't. And then I just want you to know, we do get together every quarter with DWP, the airport, and the ports to go over IT opportunities. So we look at contracting, if we can do joint contracts. We look at joint system development. Most recently we've been discussing the broadband grants, and can we cooperatively put in one broadband grant together. So I agree with this gentleman. There's probably a lot more that we can be doing, but I just want you to know that we at least have that in place.
Thank you. It's never easy for human beings to actually effectuate change. As positive as that change might be, as well-intended as that might be, the bottom line is it's just hard. Human beings have a hard time changing things, even for the better. However, in light of, I believe it to be our responsibility to be as efficient as possible. I believe it's our responsibility as a city to render savings when and however we possibly can. I think it's important for us to understand is that this change has been coming. There have been changes that have been made already. We appreciate that. However, I personally believe that the change has been way too slow. And one of the reasons why it's been slow, in my opinion, is because we as policymakers have not provided the structure and the proper amount of impetus for us to continue to keep our efforts concerted, appropriately so, on this issue. But looking at the potential for the savings, looking at the potential for how much we could continue to get done for our constituents, and yet at the same time save tens of millions of dollars a year, that's my opinion, that's my estimate. I believe that rolling forward, when we do consolidate as drastically as we could and should, we will be saving tens of millions of dollars for the city. Some of that is in equipment, some of that is in less contracting out, some of that is in having less duplication, et cetera. But the bottom line is there's just a tremendous amount of potential just sitting here waiting for us to affect that change. So with that, any other questions from the committee? No. Okay. So we are on items 3 and 7. With respect to item 3, it'll be the action of the committee to instruct the CAO to convene a working group with the appropriate departments to review the current technology consolidation and restructuring proposals and report back to the ITGA committee with recommendations. Also, this committee further instructs the departments, as outlined, as those departments that came up earlier and additional departments as identified, for them to report back to this committee by March 2nd with status updates of the following: the list of the current technology systems and projects that they maintain and are in charge of, the number of staff assigned to systems and/or technology projects within their departments, the number of staff that they'll be losing to ERIP when it comes to this respective responsibility within their departments, and the source of funding for all systems and/or technology projects, including technology infrastructure improvements. Also, to bring a brief description relative to the impacts on the department's operations, and specifically to outline for us which are the specific specialized 24/7 systems that were spoken of by various departments today that need to be maintained, and how they can be maintained either with or without consolidation, how they're maintained currently, and their ideas on how they could actually consolidate some of those responsibilities. When it comes to item number 7, it's the action of this committee to adopt the CAO recommendation and instruct the CAO to submit a proposal to council for IT restructuring and/or infrastructure efficiencies within the next 30 days. This committee also further instructs that the CAO and the CLA report back to the committee on the feasibility of establishing a committee and creating a group that reviews and prioritizes projects, creates funding protocols, scope and timelines and budgets for technology projects. Also, we further instruct the CAO and CLA to report back the pros and cons of consolidating oversight committee groups into a larger governance structure over IT projects. The CAO and CLA to report back with the recommendations for technology oversight and the committee governance structure that they would recommend. Okay. Such is the action of this committee on items 3 and 7. Thank you. We now go to item number 4.
And item number 4 is a report from the Department of General Services relative to the City of Los Angeles 2009 Strategic Real Estate Plan.
Chuck Rubin, Department of General Services. The City of Los Angeles 2009 Strategic Real Estate Plan is intended to be a broad guide to maximize the efficient use of the city's physical assets as real estate decisions are made in the future. The plan is a long-term vision for the next 10 to 20 years. Actions to be taken must also consider existing fiscal and political realities. The city's current financial crisis and the reduction in workforce will certainly affect the scope and timing of the implementation of some of the plan's recommendations. Nonetheless, the recommendations reflect what should eventually occur to allow the city to perform at its peak. The plan is a continuation and update of the 1996 Office Facilities Master Plan, which has guided the city's overall real estate decisions, including its acquisitions of the Public Works Building and Figueroa Plaza, as well as the construction of the new Police Administration Building. The key recommendations of the plan are: 1, reduced reliance on and expense for leased office space; 2, location of departments by function; 3, future construction of a new office building in the Civic Center area; and 4, revitalization of the LA Mall. We would welcome your comments or questions.
Sure. We talked about the other day in council meeting about possibility of putting an RFP on Los Angeles Mall and looking for some sort of cooperation, us getting out of the business of operating that mall. So what does that do to, if we do go that path, what does that do with your, this portion of the plan?
We had tried to send out a kind of RFP to get us into having someone manage the mall. We didn't receive any responses. Yes, we would.
Another motion on January the 26th, 2010.
Okay.
So I want you to take another look at it, because I know for a fact I've gotten some inquiries on it. So maybe we could revive the last one you did?
And you give me the,
Yeah.
and give me the names of the people, and we'd love to talk to them and have them explore the possibility of managing them all or taking over them all.
You still got to do it by RFP, though.
Yes, oh yes. Yes. But I need, it would be helpful if we have some really interested people, especially in this economic climate, that really want to do that and manage them all. We'd love to get those names and make sure that they're part of that whole RFP process.
I'll write it down and give it to you right now.
Okay.
Now, when it comes to the mall, there's no question that there's a need to renovate it. There's upgrades, there's potential there that hasn't been realized, correct?
Correct. But it will require an infusion of large capital, and I think that was a big stumbling block.
Mm-hmm. Okay. All right. It's one thing for the city to actually manage the facilities that we utilize, for example, Big Plaza mainly occupied by city departments or what have you. It's one thing for us to take responsibility for a facility when it comes to the direct management of it, because we occupy it. That's our space. We are our own tenant. But it's different when the government is there trying to act like private industry when it comes to, for example, running a mall. That, in my opinion, is much more of a commercial enterprise, not necessarily a self-maintaining enterprise, such as having a building that we occupy and we're our own tenant. So with that, we do have public comment cards. We have Dr. Clyde Williams.
Dr. Clyde Williams. I hope this, El Sereno. I hope the plan is online. But anyway, we didn't see it. One of the questions is it complete? The strategic plan as presented seems to be quite, I might say, useful. Somewhat similar to the library's strategic plan. However, it seems incomplete. Maybe that's because it's only dealing with general services. We don't know. One of the elements would be to include the air rights for all existing downtown property, the impact of Quimby funds upon the downtown properties, and relationship of Recreation and Park and DWP to the general services plan. So in general, it seems a little bit excessive in the current economic situation. However, it also seems to be incomplete in its relationship to other city-owned properties. Thank you.
Thank you. Dr. Williams, you were looking to find out how you can get a copy of the strategic real estate plan?
We didn't notice it on the agenda in the e-form.
How did they get a hold of it in e-form?
I don't need a physical copy. I prefer electronic myself.
Yeah.
So
It should be
available-
attached. It should be attached to the city clerk's
Online?
CFMS system, yes.
Okay.
Okay. Give it a shot again, and for some reason you don't seem to be able to access it in that manner, just talk to Eduardo in my office, and we'll look into how we can make it accessible to everybody.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. Okay. Any more questions from the committee? Okay. It's the action of this committee to approve the City of LA's 2009 Strategic Real Estate Plan, and also the committee instructs the CAO to study the effects of staff reductions due to ERIP and other budget actions and report back with recommendations for real estate consolidation in conjunction with item 6 of the CAO's report recommendations 10B. Okay. We move to item number 5.
And item number 5 is a motion, Cardenas-Coretz, relative to directing the CAO to submit within 60 days previously requested financial policies in the areas of capital, nonprofit leases, and the Budget Stabilization Fund.
Thank you. Good afternoon, council members. John Chavez with the CAO. Our office was asked to submit various financial policies. One of those is the capital improvement and planning policy. We're prepared to do so on that one. We'll prepare to have that ready within 60 days. Just some brief highlights of that upcoming document will include the actual policy itself, including the governance structure for the approval of capital policies, actually projects, prioritization. Also, we will have procedures on the approval of the capital improvement plan. And finally, we will be addressing findings that came up in a performance audit that was conducted last year around this time. So with that, I'm happy to take any questions that you might have about the capital improvement and planning policies and procedures.
Okay. In 2005, the Budget and Finance Committee received a list of agencies that lease city-owned properties. But since 2005, what's your understanding of what's happened when it comes to not-for-profit leases?
We have somebody from our office who's, I'm here to speak to the capital improvement and planning policies.
Okay. We have some not-for-profits that have various leases with the City of Los Angeles on some of our facilities. Some, very few are paying market rate. Some of them are paying $1 a year, what have you.
Yes, Jason with the sales office. Under the direction of Councilmember Parks, the CLA's office and our office has been involved with studying various issues. You want to?
I'll add to it.
Okay, 1, 2, 3. Okay, go ahead.
As you can tell, it is a very complex issue. The main issue is that we do have city facilities where there are nonprofits, and they're paying either $1 a year or very minimum. They amount to about 100 agencies, and they take about 500,000 square feet. The main question was whether to utilize these spaces better or to whether charge them rents that's more market-based. At this point, we're looking at, we're identifying each of the entities. We're making sure whether they have a lease or not. We're taking a look at what should be in a lease. We're checking to see which one actually do have a lease with us. And we're trying to figure out what conditions we should impose. At this point, CLA and our office is also looking at best practices. We're looking at what other entities are doing. And we're trying to compile a policy choice for you. And it will probably take us another 30 or 60 days to complete.
Yeah, Karen Culfine with the CLA's office. I think Jay summarized it pretty well there. Of course, there are a number of both policy and budgetary implications on looking at a nonprofit leasing policy. So we've already begun that process. General Services, I think, has provided a list of nonprofit leases, and we'll want to just make sure that that's current. I believe it is, and up to date. And look at the different implications for you and bring that back. There are a number of things to consider with regard to leasing rates, some consistent application of leasing contracts or where it applies to sale of city property, payment of utilities, the whole gamut of things. So we'll be bringing those back and working with the CAO and the General Services Department.
What's the timeline for getting back to us on those items?
The recommendation was 60 days, and I think that's a reasonable time frame.
Okay, all right. One of the things that I think it's important for us to compile, and that is the status of each one of our properties, especially when it comes to these not-for-profits. We need to make sure that we have facility by facility whether or not the appropriate amount of general liability insurance is being complied with. In addition to that, the various other insurances that are the responsibility of the property owner / and or the tenant, the status of the utility costs. Are we picking up some of those costs in some cases, or is that going to be taken care of by the actual occupants? Do we actually have signed lease agreements that are actually current? The status of the not-for-profit status. We might even have organizations that are being seen or understood by the community and doing wonderful work, but they've allowed their not-for-profit status to lapse. And yet at the same time, that could cause liability on our part, and somebody might be able to say that it's a gift of public funds because we have now an unidentified entity that is actually occupying our facilities. And again, they may be rendering ad hoc, services to the community that benefit our constituents in the city, and we may have assumed that that's a trade-off, but yet we may be opening ourselves to a legal vulnerable to a legal attack when it comes to who is occupying these facilities.
All right, one of the things that we'll want to look at as part of this policy are eligibility requirements to address some of those very things. It's like whether the nonprofits are in good standing with the Secretary of State and with regard to taxing and so on. We want to look at some consistency in the way the leases are structured to ensure that there's, if there's going to be a requirement to have carry liability insurance or to pay for utilities or operation and maintenance, that's applied consistently to the extent possible. So there are a lot of things to consider, and I think those are the things we want to address in the policy.
And also make sure that we're looking at, as was mentioned earlier, best practices with other municipalities or other organizations that are in similar situations as us. We're having to straddle the fence when it comes to approving and or supporting appropriate service providers in communities that have tremendous need, where we have facilities where we can accommodate, yet at the same time, I believe that we need to be much more mindful of striking the appropriate legal and documented balance between how and when we do that on a case-by-case basis. In addition to that, it's been communication from the current budget chairman for many years that we should not be absorbing all of the costs, or for example, be putting ourselves in a position where we have a year-to-year contract where it's $1 a year for those organizations, and yet we're picking up the cost of maintenance, we're picking up the cost across the board, and yet that organization is not basically at least providing their own fair share of responsibilities to the city. Again, it may be rendering services. We want to see those services continue, yet at the same time, and I think in many cases we've left for maybe 12 years or 8 years or 6 years an agreement that is perhaps outdated, or an agreement that needs to be updated and corrected. So we need to make sure that we're much more uniform on our policies and our activities and what we're actually providing for these partners in the community that are occupying our facilities. Any questions? Okay. We have a public comment card. Dr. Williams? You had 5 through 8 on one of your public comment cards. We're on item number 5.
Basic concern with all of these is the time frame. The clock is ticking, the money's flowing out, and 30 days or 60 days seems to be a little bit excessive. Maybe it should be done by the next meeting, whenever that may be. So I thought the city council gave 30 days, whereas the committee needs a shorter time frame, and the departments need a much shorter time frame. They knew it was coming. Thank you.
Thank you. It can take us 30 seconds to instruct, but we have to be realistic about what kind of workload that all of our departments have, and to make sure that they don't come back hastily, but that they come back with accurate information. I appreciate your perspective, Doctor, but at the same time, I'm personally mindful of the fact that there are many things that we ask of the individuals that work for the city, and especially the individuals who are charged with reporting to our policy committees and our budget committee. Yet at the same time, we have to be mindful of making sure that they can actually do it in a responsible manner, not just as quickly as possible. Sometimes striking the balance of the two isn't that easy. So with that, as was mentioned earlier, we expect to report back within 60 days, as outlined in all those items in the instructions given by the committee. Certainly to include all of the items that were outlined by some of my comments and questions about proper liability insurance, things of that nature, and status when it comes to not-for-profits or organizations that we have these agreements with. Okay. Thank you. Next, we move to item number 7. Oh, I'm sorry, item number 6. Yeah, we already did 7.
And item number 6 is a motion, Cardenas-Coretz, relative to directing the CAO to study with the appropriate stakeholders and report back within 30 days on a restructuring proposal for asset management.
Tony Rocha, General Manager of Department of General Services. With asset management, especially as it relates to the early retirement, I think we lost close to about 3 or 4 of our, we're looking to look at 3 or 4 of our major unit heads in that division, and we're looking at a huge, what we call brain drain, because they're leaving early retirement. So we're willing to sit down with the CAO and look where exactly where our gaps are within that particular unit and determine what we can do with existing staff, and at the same time determine what's the most important areas that we need to cover and see if that can be done with our in-house, and whatever is left, what's the possibility of some of the outsourcing as a possible option.
Okay. So how does it look in the short run when it comes to our asset management division with, as you described, the brain drain?
What we're doing now, we're looking at some reorganization options and looking at individuals that we can appoint in acting positions and prepare them to step in those particular positions that are being vacant. At the same time, we need to determine what now the most important things that we need to do within the division, and then look at the other options that the contract will either not do at all because we don't have the resources to perform those services.
So how are you going to manage it moving forward with all, I mean, are you feel comfortable you're going to manage, or you need to see certain things happen that you haven't identified yet?
There's the different things we're looking at now. We're making an assessment of what's going on in the division, and like I said, the issues like with acquisitions and different appraisals, to make sure we have staff to do that, because a lot of the things that we're doing right now within the asset management is currently being performed by contractors. The biggest issues that we need to fulfill is to having the contract administrators, having individuals within the organizations to oversee the contractors to make sure that the contracts are being fulfilled.
Thank you. Any questions? Okay. We have a public comment card on this item. We're on item number 6. No? Oh, so you had 5 and 8? I thought it was 5 through 8. Doctor. Okay. All right. Okay. Oh, okay, that was it. Thank you. All right. So with that, we'll adopt the CAO recommendation and instruct the CAO to submit a restructuring proposal for GSD's asset management division to the council within the next 30 days. Thank you. We now move to item number 8. Item number 7 was handled with item number 3 earlier.
Great. And item number 8 is a motion, Cardenas-Coretz, relative to instructing the Department of Aging, the Department of Recreation and Parks, and the CAO to develop and implement a plan to best service the senior constituency while identifying efficiencies and savings.
Good afternoon, Maria Ramos with the Office of the CAO. As part of the 3-year plans to fiscal sustainability, our office proposes to form a working group consisting of aging.
Could you get a little closer to the mic?
I'm sorry.
Thank you.
Our office proposes to form a working group consisting of aging, rec and parks, and the CAO to discuss and develop a plan for the potential consolidation of senior social services to best service the senior constituents while identifying efficiencies and potential savings. Items to be reviewed as related to the consolidation include a review of grant requirements that are tied to the program, as well as personnel to be transferred, if any. And I welcome any questions that you may have regarding this proposal.
Okay. And included in this is, what, 15 multipurpose centers?
Correct.
Okay. And those multipurpose centers tend to be more toward senior services?
Correct.
Okay. What kind of services do we provide in those multipurpose centers? Can you give us an example of the array of services that would take place in one of those centers?
James, excuse me.
James Don, Department of Aging. Our 15 multipurpose centers provide an array of services between social services such as care management, in-home services, information assistance for resources. They also provide nutrition and transportation services for the frail seniors.
So in nutrition, you're specifically talking about feeding people on a day-to-day basis?
Correct. Both at our dining centers throughout the city as well as the home delivered meals programs. The Older American Act requires basically that we establish focal points throughout the city, and our 15 multipurpose centers are the focal points acting as gateways to all other senior services.
Okay. And what's the array of funding that supports those services?
The bulk of the funding is Older American Act funds. They're federal dollars that are passed through the California Department of Aging down to the city of LA. We also have some Prop A transportation funds to run our door-to-door transportation program, and some CDBG funds to operate our adult day programs as well as our emergency alert program for homebound seniors that live alone.
No more questions from the committee. Is anybody here to speak on item number 8? Doctor, you want to speak on item 8? Good, put 5 through 8 on one of these public comment cards. Okay. I just want to make sure. Kind of quiet today. All right. Okay. So with that, the committee instructs the CAO and the CLA to report back to the Arts Committee relative to the line item descriptions of services, policies, and programs provided by Aging and Recreation and Parks. In addition, this report must include the number of staff assigned to programs, targeted population by geography, source of funding, goals and objectives of the services provided by the department. Also, we instruct the CDD and the Department of Disability to participate in this process as needed. And also, the committee adopts the CAO recommendation and instructs the Aging, Recreation and Parks, and CAO to implement a plan that addresses efficiencies and savings while maintaining service to senior constituents and reduces potential liability. Okay. Thank you. We now go to items 9 and 10. We'll hear them together.
And item 9 is motion Carnes-Coretz relative to directing GSD to identify cost savings for fleet maintenance work that could be outsourced quickly, to address gaps and submit amendments to current service parts contracts to provide additional maintenance services. And item number 10 is also the motion Carnes-Coretz relative to directing GSD to develop a fleet maintenance service RFP.
Tony Royster, General Manager, Department of General Services. Fleet services, as it relates to ERIP, is probably one of the largest divisions that will be hit by the early retirement. In general, as a department, we're looking that we could lose close to 220 positions. And as of today, concerning the transfer of general fund to special funds, we lost a total of 50. And we're really concerned about the fleet services, and there's a number of ways that we're looking to address those issues. A couple of the ways we're looking at, maybe with some of the gaps that we have that we can fill with 90 authorities temporarily until we can get everything settled or solidified to provide the services. At the same time, we're sitting down with each department, some of our major customers like sanitation, street service, and transportation, and see exactly what equipment they're looking to keep in the inventory and what they're looking to get rid of. Because the biggest challenge that we have, we're waiting to see what the impact of early retirement is on the inventory of the of our fleet. And we have the Assistant General Manager over Fleet, Angela Sherrick, to give us more details about exactly what we're doing and what the direction that we're going as it relates to fleet.
As Tony mentioned, we've talked with our major users, and we've had many discussions with them. And the feedback we've received so far is that they want to wait until ERIP kind of calms down to determine how many pieces of equipment and vehicles they'll be resubmitting, because at that point, it'll give us a better idea of exactly how much staffing we'll need to go forward. And as Tony said, one of the things that we're looking at, well, we actually have a plan in place to cover the gaps, and the first thing that we'll be looking at, of course, is departments resubmitting equipment that they're not using. Secondly, as Tony mentioned, we'll be looking at 90-day contracts. We also already have some contracts in place with vendors, and if necessary, we'll be looking at expanding those contracts in order to get the work done. And lastly, we'll be looking at RFPs. But in addition to all of that, we've also met with other departments that have fleets. So we've met with the police department, who is here today, the fire department, to form a task force. Also, as part of that task force, we've met with Water and Power, Harbor, and airports. And what we're trying to do is look at services that are overlapping and determine if there are any resources that we can use as a group to institute cost savings. So as part of, I think, Councilmember Zine's motion, he asked that we put together a task force, and that was something that we were already doing. We've already had our first meeting, and in addition to that task force, we've looked at an ad hoc committee to actually look at purchasing processes. So we have quite a few things that we already have in process to respond to the questions that Council has asked. And at this point, we're just looking at having time to give us some time to actually respond back and put some things into place so that we can come back to this committee and answer your questions more fully. And with respect, as I said, police and fire are both here also. We have been working very closely with them to come up with a plan to be able to address all of our fleets. So if you had questions for them, they're here also.
Last year, the CEO instructed the various city departments to reduce their fleet by 10%. What's our measure of success on that attempt?
We actually did very well last year. We're actually looking at 84% success rate for last year. And the total amount of sales for August was about $2.3 million. So the number of units that were submitted were about 770. The target was 770. We had about 644 units turned in. More difficult has been the fleet reduction for this year. We only had about 220 vehicles pledged, and of that 220, 175 have actually been turned in, which is about an 80% success rate. However, based on the numbers, it's a very small number. So we're not doing as well as we did the previous year.
Okay. When it comes to police and fire, is anybody here to comment on your fleet responsibilities?
Good afternoon. Larry Tagawa, Director of Transportation, Police Department. In regards to fleet reduction, we reduced our fleet size by about 250 vehicles to date. We still have plans to continue that reduction, another additional 100 vehicles. Bear in mind, while we're reducing our fleet size, the sworn size until recently has also grown, which again presents a difficult problem for us. But we're continuing with that fleet reduction program.
Daniel McCarty, Battalion Chief, LA Fire Department. The fire department's fleet is funded almost entirely through the MCLEV program and through our MCLEV replacement program. Our fleet has maintained its size. I'm not aware of any significant reduction in our fleet as a result of that move that you were talking about, and I'm not even sure at this point if we were excluded from that or if we were to be included. But we maintain a fleet of roughly a little over 1,100 vehicles.
I don't think we're asking you to get rid of any fire trucks or ambulances.
I understand that, but we do have other parts of our fleet, our non-emergency cars that are used primarily by inspectors, and we have a number of cars that are used for our on-call staff.
And doesn't each member of your brass get a vehicle?
Those are the on-call cars that I referred to.
That's what you call them, on-call cars?
Right. Those members have responsibility to respond. We're on a rotating basis. We have 4 teams that are the incident management teams. We have major incidents like the brush fires, the train wreck, things like that. Those members are called in that are on call and respond in those vehicles.
And to GSD, how many vehicles do you have responsibility for right now?
About 11,000 vehicles and pieces of equipment.
11,000 vehicles and pieces of equipment.
Correct.
And has your budget for that responsibility been growing or shrinking over the last few years?
The budget has shrank over the last few years with respects to replacement.
How about support staff?
Yes.
Support staff has been reduced also.
Okay. And then with ERIP, it provides an additional dynamic of reduction, right?
Yes, with ERIP, and also if you include the transfers. And like I said, on yesterday, this morning, we found out that we have a total of 50 that is transferring to other departments, which it's good news for the employees or whatever. At the same time, we must take the steps to reorganize and restructure our organization to determine what we can do and what we can't do.
And on this aspect of your responsibilities, how has ERIP impacted your both departments, police, fire?
The police department, prior to the ERIP, we're at about a 20% vacancy rate, and with the ERIP that's taken place, we expect additional 10%, which would put us around 30% on our vacancy rate. However, our business plan calls for our fleet department to continue to provide the core basic maintenance services with our existing staff after the ERIP.
Similarly, our vacancy rate was also just around 20% prior to the ERIP. We expect it to be 27 to 30% when the ERIP concludes. And all of this while our call load is constantly increasing, people calling for our services, particularly with the difficulty in obtaining health care and the downturn. So our workload in the maintenance section is driven by the mileage, and our mileage is driven by the 911 calls. So we really don't have any means to reduce the major portion of our need for maintenance.
Thank you. We now go to public comment on item number 9. Julie Butcher.
Representing the mechanics for all three of these departments, the workers are really proud of what they do. They believe that they do a tremendous job. Obviously, we've done that with fewer and fewer folks. And frankly, all three of these departments have really engaged mechanics in a way I think that makes the work possible. Rather than privatizing or attempting to look at contracting this work out, particularly this work, SEIU, the unions of Los Angeles, will fight actively and aggressively against schemes to privatize, particularly this service. Again, given that we do a really good job in the most cost-effective way, we do believe that down the road we're going to need to come together to figure out a plan for training mechanics. We believe that we could train existing workers that already work for the city that are in danger of not having jobs elsewhere, particularly, for instance, there are thousands of potential part-time workers in the city parks. We believe that there have got to be 50 of them that could be trained as mechanics with some mechanical aptitude, because the reality is that fire trucks don't fix themselves. After every high-speed chase, the mechanics in the police department are required to do, I believe it's a 72-point check of each vehicle. So the notion of privatizing the service doesn't make any sense. I mean, you could probably fill in the rest of this sentence. It doesn't make any sense. We provide an excellent service with existing mechanics providing the service going forward. So we hope to work with you all to figure out how we make sure that we keep this work happening. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anybody here to make public comment on item number 9? Okay. All right. We are on items 9 and 10. Anybody here to speak on item number 10? Okay, public comment on items 9 and 10 is now closed. So with that, the committee on item number 9 adopts the CAO recommendation and instructs GSD to identify cost savings and efficiencies for fleet maintenance and report to the council within 60 days. On item number 10, The committee adopts the CAO recommendation and instructs the GSD to develop an RFP for contracting fleet services currently provided by GSD and report to council within 90 days. Thank you. We now move to item number 11.
And item number 11 is motion Cardenas-Corretz relative to directing the CAO to study with appropriate stakeholders and report back on a public-private partnership proposal on general services publishing.
Tony Royster, General Manager, Department of General Services. This particular motion is, I think, is to look and see if some strategies to charging indirects back in our publishing unit, and we're more than happy to sit down with the CAO and see what the appropriate rate to try to recover some of the indirect costs that is associated with our publishing division, and at the same time see what that impact will be on the general fund.
And I'm Mike Layton, Director of Publishing Services. We welcome the opportunity and believe strongly in the need to be competitive with private sector printing. Recently, City Attorney's Office has canceled the contract with a private sector copying shop, directing their employees to send their work to our central duplicating facility. Over the last 10 years, we've lowered the prices in that area 5 times at a savings to the city of over $6 million. We also plan on taking the ITA's mainframe printing over by the end of the year. So these are some of the things we'd like to be considered. We'd also like to take a look at what costs, of course, are being associated with the assumption of indirect costs. I want to remain competitive. We would like to be able to recover the costs that are associated with running our business.
How are we doing when it comes to being competitive and when it comes to this service?
Well, we have 2 elements within our shop. One is the copy work, and the other is the offset printing work. We're about 40% less at the rate structure we have today, but we don't recover healthcare costs, pension costs, and we don't pay lease or utility costs like every other department. None of us, I don't think anybody recovers lease or utility costs. At that rate, though, we're saving the city about $5 million a year. In addition to the ongoing savings, we take care of the copier program, which we don't charge for. In the first year we did that, we saved $1.4 million. That was in 2001, 2002. It was the consolidation we did with the new copier program. Last year, we took over the business tax renewal booklet for Office of Finance at a savings of $350,000 for that job alone. A lot of that had to do with the job being re-engineered so that we could print it. So we're saving money not only on an ongoing basis, but also on an individual basis as well through technology that we put in. We have a new press that we put in 2 years ago that's saving about $400,000 a year in faster make-ready times and quicker run speeds. So we've really been doing this all along. For the last 10 years, we've been lowering our costs. Much of the printing that was done today, you'll notice that if you look at the documents that are around, our revenue's actually gone down a little bit. And one of the things I'm concerned about in terms of looking at privatization is for the future, we should be looking at reducing our print and moving work to electronic formats. I don't think an outside vendor is going to have that kind of compelling reason to do that. And we should be looking at WME Now and Zoombox and some other areas where we can, in conjunction with print programs, gradually reduce the need to print. That should be our goal. And at the same token, we should also be bringing in printing from other municipalities, so using the equipment that we currently have and bringing money that isn't here today. That's an opportunity for us. We did a job for the city of Glendale. It was a small job, about $10,000, but we were able to contribute $800 back to the general fund based on charging them the cap rate. That's what I'd like to see. I'd prefer to see that we maintain the same structure we currently have.
What was Glendale's response to that work that you did for them?
Oh, they loved the job. They do have a couple contracts with local printers, and I've been very careful, even though city attorney last year gave us the opinion we could sell to other municipalities. I've been very careful with small cities. My father was a printer. He was a line type operator for the Times. I know how hard it is when you're a small shop and you're relying on an organization for your work. A lot of times it's most of your money coming in. So I prefer to deal with the county of LA or MTA, MWD, those types of shops, as opposed to a small city that's really maybe a small family-run business is counting on.
Does the county of LA have their own print shop?
No, they got rid of it a long time ago, actually. They've got about a dozen contracts that are wildly different pricing on them that they employ.
Do we know of anybody over at the county that might be somewhat familiar with the city of Los Angeles that might be willing to look into us potentially contracting with them?
They've actually offered to allow us to bid on their work, and they've encouraged us to, but their current contracts don't expire for 2 years. We've actually, the city of LA's print shop is the largest shop in the state, other than the state shop itself. It's more effective than the city and county of San Francisco, which is combined, and much larger than the city of San Diego's as well.
Well, what's the CAO's position on the efficiency rate of our current print shop? Anybody here from the CAO's office? Anybody here from the CAO's office that could comment on what their opinion is of the efficiency rate of our print shop?
Jason with the CAO's office. The evidence suggests that most of the departments find the publishing division high-quality work very easy to work with and very professional. What we're trying to do with this public-private partnership is to try to cost out what it costs us to have a in-house publishing division. And if you add up all the costs, not just the salaries, equipment, expenses, but all the others that go with it, the healthcare, the pensions, the water and electricity, the space, and see how that compares with what a contractor might charge us for the same type of work. In looking at this, what we propose is, number one, to work with all the stakeholders to try to figure out what variables that we should include, come up with a number that we all agree would be what they should be charging, and have a pricing list of their work that reflects all the costs. And then we will try to see what outside vendors would charge us for these menu of services and look at the differences and to see whether it makes more sense to keep it in-house, or maybe, as Mike has so well spoken, look at other ideas that would actually help us reduce costs. But in looking at it, it's a comparison. We're trying to get the apples-to-apples comparison. And if the end product is a product, we like to see what it would cost to have it inside and have a vendor, and make a policy choice once we realize what the costs are. And that's what that's the study that we propose. We'll go back and take a look at this, bring you back with what we found, and try to go through the process so that when it comes down to it, that you have all the information necessary to make your policy decision.
When you do work for the various departments within the city, do you score a charge to that department, or are you compensated by every activity, or is there, for some reason, some things are exempt?
Well, there's very few exemptions. One of the most notable one is when a council member takes office, their first set of stationery and so on, we do at no charge just to get them up to speed as quickly as possible. Other than that, we're on a time and materials cost accounting for every job. And we run a data collection system, which allows us to measure productivity. We run 2 shifts to get the best ROI on our equipment, and we're able to track what each job costs. One of the things that we're doing a little differently now in the light of perhaps having to increase our costs is run all of our jobs through a quotation first so that the operators know exactly what's expected of them. So as opposed to just saying, okay, today it's going to cost this much, if somebody else does it, it's going to cost something else, it'll take a little more work on the beginning, but we'll quote the jobs and then they'll know what's expected. That will allow us to help contain the costs and create the price sheet that Jay's speaking of. One of my concerns is that, 2 of them actually, is that it's almost impossible to do an apples-to-apples comparison because there's burdens that we have that outside doesn't have, that private sector firms don't have. They can go out and get as many customers as they like. I've got one customer, and it's you folks. There's also, they have flexibility in their workforce. If you're slow on the outside, you send the people home. You know, I have to keep them busy. I don't have that luxury. So those are some of the things that I'm a little concerned about when you're trying to do an apples-to-apples comparison. Again, I want us to be as competitive as possible, and I believe we have a history of that. But it's a little bit difficult.
And what we hope too is those particular issues will be addressed when we have those stakeholder meetings with the CAO, the CLA, the mayor's office, where everything is put on the table to make sure that that everything's being addressed on both sides.
Stakeholder meetings, when do you anticipate having the next stakeholder meeting of that kind?
Next week.
Most likely next week.
Next week? Yes. Okay. All right. Okay. We have public comment cards on this item, item number 11. We have Julie Butcher and also Dr. Williams.
There are things that arguably should be evaluated. This is one that really doesn't make any sense. If you do, you need to include...
Does it make sense to evaluate it, or...?
It frankly doesn't. I think that this has been one of those operations that has been studied and restudied and studied again. And the cost, including the cost of these conversations right now, need to be included on that side of the ledger. When you're talking about apples to apples, if you're talking about rent and utility at Piper Tech, frankly, unless you're going to get rid of Piper Tech, then it exists, and including the cost of it doesn't seem to make any sense. The labor agreement that operates between now and 2014 precludes any worker represented by the coalition from losing their job as a result of privatization. So these workers are going to be paid whether or not you privatize this service. And when we're talking about comparing costs, there's a council motion that requires a union bug on every piece of printing. And so the competitive comparison needs to be that with a unionized print shop.
Yeah. Okay. Julie, or does anybody know how many union print shops we have that have the capability of the volume that we deal with?
There's very few union shops in LA, just as a general comment.
Yeah.
They're much more prevalent in San Francisco for some reason.
Well, for example, when when I do certain printing outside of my city responsibilities, I go to a union shop, and my guy in the valley, I mean, he's literally a guy. He's one guy. And I think over the last few years, he went from having a few folk, it's really him and maybe somebody coming in part-time or what have you, or whatever his arrangement is. But he's managed to remain union, but it's really sad because he doesn't have the capability of handling this volume. He figures it out when he gets a big job. But the bottom line is, he makes it work. But the bottom line is they don't have the capability, those guys don't have the capability of doing the kind of volume that is demanded of you on a daily basis.
And that's generally very true, particularly if you're looking at the copy side of the shops, because it's a commodity. It's not really like it used to be. And so the margins are so slim that you really have to cut costs wherever you can. So it's not only just union costs associated with it, but even when you get into the living wage and some of the ordinances that we have to pursue on a regular basis, it is a problem. Beyond that, the printing industry itself is changing dramatically. Thank God I'm at the end of my career instead of the beginning. I've been doing this 40 years. Wow. And, in the next 10 years, all bets are off, really. That's why part of what I see my responsibility is managing that evolution and reducing the amount of print that we do, because it's inevitable. Again, my dad being a line top operator, I saw it happen. It's very common. So union shops and locally, there's very few because they're not competitive cost-wise. They do very good work, and they generally, I think they oftentimes do better work. But the capital equipment it takes to run an operation, even of our size, has gotten to be so much. It used to be you could go into business for $50,000. One DI press now is $350,000. So it just doesn't lend itself well to the mom-and-pop shops that used to characterize our industry. So there's a lot of consolidation, and frankly, I know it shouldn't be considered, but one of my concerns about the people that work for me are these aren't people that are going to go work for the library or Harbor or DWP. These are people that are just going to flat out be out of a job in an industry which is already experiencing a lot of consolidation. Yeah, exactly. So I feel a great responsibility for them.
So 40 years ago, did you used to get a lot of ink on your hands?
Linotype. I've had lead in my hands.
Yeah.
I may have been a doctor if it hadn't been handling all that lead. Or worked for the CAO. I'm not sure.
Today pretty much
Hey, watch it.
Didn't skip a beat on that one. So today, do you have to wait till maybe one of your pen breaks to get some ink on your hands?
Yeah, actually, I haven't ran a press in probably 20 years.
Wow.
Yeah, it's been a long time. And it's a young man's job anyway. There's a lot of lifting and that sort of thing, so it's just as well.
Okay, all right, thank you. Yes. Dr. Williams.
Shall we go home?
No.
Publishing. Public-private partnerships. It's difficult to follow that. Electronic publishing. Why are we talking about print publishing anymore? It's going out. Maybe we should give the printing or the publishing department over to DWP or maybe to the port, because they still do some hard copy publishing. They have the money. Okay. Importantly, I don't know of any private company that would take on the union, the pension benefits, and the pension, and then the health benefits that are required for moving the general services anywhere, other than maybe DWP, because they already have it. So I would recommend that, you don't need 30 days to go over this one. You need a good city attorney that can do the public-private partnership agreements, but, transfer it to DWP. Thank you.
Come on up. Thank you, Doctor.
DWP is our largest customer. So we do about $1,090,000, and again, with DWP. So they have a small print shop, but we do almost all of their printing. So of the $6 million we do, about a fourth of that is DWP, Harbor, and airports. Anyway.
Okay. And when you do work for the proprietaries, we charge them based on the surface rate, or are we allowed to consolidate the true cost at the end of the day for our operations? For example, we're running at about a 40-50% above wages when it comes to other compensating factors, when it comes to how much it costs per employee.
Right, and the wages are only a portion of our hourly rate for our equipment. As an example, a 5-color Comoria bill's out just under $200 an hour. And yet the operator that runs that makes about $26 an hour. So that 40% is really on top of the 26. So it's not a big difference, which is why that example of the city of Glendale was a fairly small check that compared to it. So again, they're on time and materials like everybody else, as we struggle to kind of find out what our burden rate actually is going to be. Again, what I would prefer to see is that we charge that burden rate to organizations like that and outside municipalities.
But today we don't charge the true burden rate to DWP.
No.
Why not? No, seriously.
No, I understand.
Are we precluded, or we created a custom and practice that we haven't been willing to change?
Which is...
Councilmember, if they do charge the full rate, then we would have to provide more funding to the departments printing and binding accounts.
No, we're talking about the proprietaries.
Just the proprietaries. Yeah. And we should be charging them the burden.
Yes, that's actually one of the issues that we really have to look at, because as you can see from the discussion, without getting to that level, everything is anecdotal, because we have to find out how much it will cost to have this division operating. And, as Julie said, and as many have said, the quality and the type of service that the publishing division provide, and we all know that it's high quality. It just happens that we have to find this number so we can give you a recommendation as to the policy.
And perhaps part of that conversation can be who we apply that rate to. Rather than perhaps everybody, perhaps we can continue to be at a similar rate to what we are for the city departments, continue saving them the money that we are, but gather more work from outside agencies to bring money in that isn't currently here, rather than take money from this pocket and put it in that pocket.
Eduardo from your office has volunteered to be on this task force, so that...
You need an ink on your hands? All task force. Okay.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. A lot has been, I think way too much has been expected of this public-private partnership phrase. And the fact of the matter is, I think that what we're dealing with in this particular item is a perfect example of something that, quite frankly, is still a specialty work. It's one thing to go over to a facility and say, hand them a piece of paper and say, give me 50 copies of this. Yeah, that's pretty mundane, it's pretty straightforward, and it's probably coming out to a cost of 1.1 cents per copy or whatever it is today. However, when it comes to true printing and volume and in mass, that's still a specialty. And as was mentioned, it may require something where you're using a $350,000 machine, as an example. So the bottom line is, this is a perfect example of the CAO needing to really sharpen its pencils and sharpen its mind and its analytical mind to be able to understand the true essence of what we're dealing with here with this particular function. And at the same time, to be honest with ourselves, we need to make sure that we are looking at the true potential of how and who we can work with in order to make sure that we can continue to have this quality work and create the least burden as possible on the general fund at the end of the month, at the end of the year. And as a result of that, I think that we will have a great opportunity to appropriately and responsibly keep this operation going within the city and not having to go to a public-private partnership if we look at things realistically and if we look at the potential and responsibilities that this facility can actually take on. Specifically looking at the proprietaries, specifically looking at possibly working with the county and or, for example, there's the it's a county-wide organization, the County Sanitation District. I bet you they at one time had their own printing department, and I bet you they don't anymore. But they're huge. They're a multi-billion-dollar annual expenditure organization, and they do a lot of publications, and they do a lot of outreach, they do a lot of notifications, and the bottom line is we need to talk to them about whether or not we can work with them as well. So there are other opportunities we need to explore, relationships we already have, and responsibilities we share with other jurisdictions, but I can guarantee you we haven't looked at whether or not they would be willing to consider us as a go-to organization when it comes to massive printing, big printing, those kinds of jobs that, quite frankly, small organizations can't compete with us on. They just can't, union or not, when it comes to pricing. So with that, this committee will instruct the CAO to report to the council with recommendations for implementing a full cost recovery model and the impacts on departments and operation budgets within 30 days. However, included in that is I want to hear from the department as to what the department's opinion is as to the apples to apples or apples to oranges comparisons as to how we can arrive at a policy decision as to what makes the best sense. This is a very difficult one because we are dealing with a unique service. It's hard to compare the service with other operators around town, especially when you look at the idea that there are very few big operators that are actually union shops, very few operators that are actually producing product like this that are even living wage shops. So the last thing I want to do is take something that we do well, take something that we possibly could at least have no impact to the general fund in short order, and then to go ahead and get rid of it and end up working with the subpar contractors, and then just because if we were to dismantle this operation within the city of Los Angeles, we'll never get it back. We will never reconstruct. So this is a very serious matter in the sense that this is something that I believe we can do right, and if we look at it honestly, we may be looking at, hopefully will very likely be looking at keeping this function within the city and also improving the bottom dollar when it comes to the impact of the general fund. Okay? So please be mindful of that. I don't want to say that we want to engineer the outcomes, but I have a feeling that that if we look at it appropriately and constructively, that we may find ourselves realizing that we can improve on the bottom dollar, we can reduce the impact of the general fund dramatically, and very soon, perhaps in the next year to two, have this not only not impact the general fund, but break even or actually contribute. Okay? Thank you very much. So with that, that's the actions of this committee. Is there anybody here for general public comment? Dr. Williams filled out a card for general public comment, but he appears to have left. Is there anybody else here for general public comment? Seeing and hearing none, general public comment is now closed. This committee is now adjourned.